Most classrooms show European men discovering progress, while African rulers watch silently from the margins today. The belief stands because officials, teachers, and publishers repeat it, while students absorb authority unquestioned. A West African court stands crowded as armored visitors hesitate, watching local officials control trade access. European negotiators grip papers tightly, while African administrators decide movement, prices, and permission through gestures. The promise follows quietly as consequences unfold through contracts enforced by African authority, not foreign weapons. A king steps forward, inspecting weights, while merchants wait, understanding that compliance determines survival and profit. Guards loyal to the court shift positions, signaling enforcement power without speeches, banners, or raised voices. Foreign traders exchange looks, calculating losses, recognizing leverage they did not expect or record publicly. Scribes record transactions behind the throne, documenting standards that later appear attributed elsewhere without acknowledgment. The court disperses slowly, leaving Europeans escorted out, agreements intact, authority visibly unchanged that day. Along coastal cities, African shipbuilders oversee docks, while foreign crews request access under supervision. Local captains inspect hulls, sails, and cargo, approving departures through nods rather than written permissions. European officers stand waiting, hands behind their backs, adjusting to unfamiliar command structures silently. Weapons remain lowered because enforcement appears certain, organized, and backed by community recognition. Harbor masters signal departure times, controlling tides, labor, and schedules through practiced authority. Foreign logs later describe cooperation, omitting who controlled movement, timing, and safety entirely. Inland, gold caravans move under royal banners, while foreign buyers follow designated routes obediently. Tax collectors ride alongside, counting loads, enforcing levies through presence and escorts. European traders complain privately, then comply publicly, knowing alternative routes remain closed deliberately. Court messengers deliver decisions swiftly, ending disputes without violence, demonstrating centralized administrative control. These processes generate records, later archived abroad, stripped of originating authority names. An African queen presides over hearings, settling trade conflicts, while petitioners await rulings silently. Her guards stand unmoving, hands resting on weapons, reinforcing decisions without spoken threats. Foreign representatives bow slightly, acknowledging outcomes before returning to ships, visibly constrained. Minutes later, scribes seal rulings, ensuring consistency across territories under unified governance. European letters home describe fairness, then shift credit to imagined external guidance. A fortified city's gates close at dusk, controlled by African commanders managing security routines. Foreign residents remain inside designated quarters, dependent on local protection arrangements. Patrols rotate methodically, demonstrating order that contradicts later depictions of disorder. Officials inspect armories, maintaining readiness without confrontation or display. Foreign observers note efficiency privately, while public narratives later erase these systems. Markets operate under standardized measures enforced by appointed inspectors circulating daily. Traders comply because penalties apply immediately, visibly, and consistently across ethnic lines. European merchants adapt their behaviors, adopting local customs to maintain access. These adaptations rarely appear in imperial accounts published afterward. Council debates alliances, weighing foreign proposals against regional stability considerations. Elders speak, generals listen, messengers wait, reflecting institutional decision-making processes. Foreign envoys sit quietly, recognizing outcomes precede their preferences. Agreements are finalized with handshakes under watchful guards, not ceremonial theatrics. Later histories rename these councils as informal gatherings lacking structure. An African astronomer adjusts instruments while sailors consult him before ocean crossings. Charts remain controlled locally, released selectively based on trust and compensation. Foreign captains wait, understanding that navigation knowledge determines survival. Later maps replicate this information without credit, attributing discoveries elsewhere. A ruler inspects armaments, ensuring technological parity through local manufacturing oversight. Workshops produce metalwork while apprentices learn techniques passed through generations. Foreign buyers request samples, recognizing that quality surpasses expectations. Subsequent accounts describe imported superiority, contradicting observed production realities. Diplomats gather during festivals, negotiating boundaries amid public celebrations. Security remains tight, preventing coercion through crowd management and patrols. Foreign delegations accept terms, recognizing the enforcement capacity behind festivities. Treaties are signed quietly, then reinterpreted later through foreign legal frameworks. An African treasurer audits accounts, correcting discrepancies before approving expenditures. Subordinates comply, demonstrating bureaucratic discipline and record gatekeeping. Foreign contractors receive payments contingent upon performance benchmarks. Later narratives depict the absence of fiscal systems, ignoring these practices. Military drills occur outside city walls, units maneuvering under centralized command. Observers note discipline, coordination, and strategic planning. Foreign officers attend silently, recalibrating assumptions about force hierarchy. Subsequent writings minimize these drills as ceremonial displays. A royal court dismisses a foreign demand, redirecting trade through alternative partners. Messengers ride immediately, implementing changes across regions. Foreign profits decline, prompting reassessment of negotiation strategies. Later histories describe economic decline without explaining deliberate policy decisions. A council reviews foreign behavior, restricting access following contract violations. Guards enforce restrictions calmly, escorting offenders out without spectacle. Foreign complaints escalate to home institutions seeking intervention. Institutional responses begin reframing authority to justify interference. European officials draft reports emphasizing instability, omitting prior compliance records. Publishers select excerpts supporting expansion narratives. African signatories disappear from documents, replaced by anonymous military expeditions arrive later, citing protection and order restoration. Local leaders resist through procedural denial rather than open battle. Supplies withheld, route disclosed, cooperation withdrawn systematically. Foreign forces respond with laws, proclamations, and administrative takeovers. Courts dissolve, replaced by imported legal structures. African administrators reassigned or dismissed, authority transferred quietly. Records move overseas, reclassified under colonial archives. Educational salabi later present these transitions as natural progressions. Students memorize outcomes without seeing the faces involved. Museums display artifacts without naming the governing institutions that produced them. The media portrays kingdoms as backdrops, not decision-making entities. Modern borders reflect extracted agreements, lacking original context. Public memory absorbs simplified stories, repeated through textbooks and documentaries. The unresolved question remains visible as classrooms continue teaching outcomes detached from living authority figures. The classroom bell rings, while administrators approve curricula that deliberately exclude named African institutions. A publishing board reviews manuscripts, rejecting sections, identifying African governance as foundational to modern systems. Editors request neutral language, removing agency, and converting rulers into passive cultural references. Authors comply to secure contracts, watching erasure become procedural rather than dramatic. University committees adopt standardized surveys, privileging sources archived under imperial catalog numbers. African origin documents remain untranslated, inaccessible, or reclassified as folklore materials. Students graduate, carrying assumptions shaped by omissions rather than contested evidence. A museum director approves exhibit labels, emphasizing exploration over negotiation and prior authority. Curators display weapons without commanders, thrones without councils, treaties without visitors walk through, silently, absorbing absences, authenticity. Funding bodies reward projects, aligning with established narratives, discouraging institutional challenge. Researchers adjust proposals, narrowing the scope to avoid controversy or rejection. Meanwhile, descendants of administrators maintain oral records outside recognized academic value. Community elders recount procedures, names, and decisions unrecorded officially. These testimonies remain excluded from citations, lacking institutional endorsement. A televised documentary reenacts encounters, casting Africans as scenery rather than decisions. Viewers accept visuals, unaware that choices were scripted through archival bias. Streaming platforms prioritize retention metrics over corrective complexity. Producers cut scenes, showing African leverage, citing pacing concerns. Global audiences internalize simplified power flows without conscious resistance. A school board debates, curriculum updates, facing political pressure to maintain comfort. Proposed changes stall through subcommittees and budgetary reviews. The delay functions as denial, preserving existing narratives quietly. A legal scholar examines treaties, noting unilateral reinterpretations encoded into colonial law. Courts reference precedents built upon those reinterpretations. Judgments reinforce outcomes without revisiting original authority contexts. Modern trade agreements echo structures imposed during those transitions. traditions. Negotiating teams operate within inherited frameworks, rarely questioning origins. Economic disparities persist, framed as developmental rather than historical consequences. Media commentary discusses inequality without referencing administrative dismantling. Policy discussions focus forward, avoiding backward accountability. An African archive digitization project struggles for funding and visibility. Servers host documents that few institutions acknowledge or integrate. Search algorithms prioritize established databases, burying alternative records. Researchers, relying on convenience, perpetuate an imbalance unconsciously. A conference panel features experts citing each other, reinforcing consensus loops. Questions about African institutional origins receive polite deflection. Session cheers redirect the discussion towards safer comparative topics. The audience applauds, signaling closure rather than inquiry. A government education ministry reviews international benchmarks before approving textbooks. Alignment with global standards outweighs local historical specificity. Publishers comply, ensuring market access across regions. African contributions remain generalized, stripped of governing detail. Students memorize timelines without understanding the decision-makers involved. A journalist uncovers correspondence revealing suppressed acknowledgments of African authority. Editors weigh publication risks against advertiser relationships. The story runs shortened, critical sections removed. Public reaction remains muted, lacking sustained exposure. A streaming series hints at complexity, then pivots toward familiar heroic arcs. Viewers binge content without encountering systemic accountability. An activist group petitions for curriculum reform, submitting documented evidence. Committees acknowledge receipt, initiating multi-year review processes. Momentum dissipates through procedural exhaustion. A foreign museum repatriates artifacts without contextual governance explanations. Ceremonies occur, but narratives remain unchanged. Artifacts return silent, disconnected from institutional histories. An academic journal publishes a special issue challenging prevailing assumptions. Citation counts remain low, limiting perceived impact. Hiring committees prioritize metrics over disruptive scholarship. Young scholars adjust research interests accordingly. A policy think tank references African kingdoms as cultural influences only. Structural contributions remain absent from models and recommendations. Decision-makers consume briefs, reinforcing inherited frameworks. A documentary filmmaker screens footage showing African courts exercising authority. Distributors request re-edits, emphasizing conflict over administration. The filmmaker compromises to secure release. Audiences see tension without understanding governance continuity. A national archive declassifies records revealing negotiated power transfers. Press coverage focuses briefly, then Mobis or educational materials remain unchanged. The silence persists through repetition rather than censorship. Classroom discussion questions, guided by an attentive teacher. Students seek sources beyond assigned textbooks. Institutional resistance appears through grading standards and assessment criteria. Critical inquiry becomes extracurricular rather than curricular. An international body issues guidelines encouraging inclusive histories. Implementation remains voluntary, uneven, and slow. Member states interpret recommendations selectively. A public monument commemorates exploration without acknowledging negotiated entry. Passersby absorb symbolism without context. Urban space reinforces simplified narratives daily. A digital platform hosts debates exposing contradictions with documented evidence. Algorithms limit reach, prioritizing engagement over correction. Discourse fragments into isolated communities. A historian presents evidence before a skeptical audience. Questions challenge legitimacy rather than content. Authority structures defend themselves through procedural skepticism. An education reform proposal reaches legislative debate. Opposition frames changes as unnecessary disruption. Vote stall, preserving existing curricula. A generation advances through institutions shaped by these decisions. Professional roles reinforce narratives learned earlier. The cycle continues through policy, media, and education alignment. African institutional origins remain present, yet unacknowledged within modern systems. The weight of omission shapes understanding more effectively than overt denial.